Buckle up, this is going to be a bit of a long one, but the Church of the Hagia Sophia has a great deal of history behind it, which speaks to not only the architecture of the period, but the political history of the period. It is the Church of Holy Wisdom, and it was meant originally as the Emperor's Church, really representing the city, the equivalent of St. Paul's in Rome, St. Peter's in Rome, excuse me. And we see it's right in the center of the city. It's by the baths, the Senate House, near the Forum. So it's very, very central. That speaks to its role, its importance. So it was meant to be a rival to St. Peter's in the west, and we're seeing a very, very different architecture. The church is originally built in around 326. It's originally built by Constantine. Although Constantine's church is destroyed by fire in 415, so within 100 years, less than 100 years, about 75 years of its construction. And it will be rebuilt. And here we're moving back. So the one you see in front is a reconstruction of what Constantine likely built, and then we see other reconstructions of the Hagia Sophia because it has a very complicated history. In 532, during the reign of Justinian, it is going to be destroyed in the Nicaea revolt. 5 years later, it is going to be rebuilt. And they used a great deal of imported spoils and materials from Justinian's conquest to build it. And we see it growing over time, especially that dome developing over time. The finest Greek craftsmen were used to create this piece. Ultimately, a physicist and mathematician, Isidore of Miletus, will get involved, and they build the first dome, which, if I back up here for a second, is that second image. So it's a very flat dome. It's a great idea, but we see a shaky execution on this 136-foot high dome. So you walk in, it's about 13 stories above you. In 558, it collapses in an earthquake. It's rebuilt lighter and higher, and then collapses again in 986 during an earthquake and rebuilt in 1346. More or less the form that we see today. The problem is, unlike Rome, ancient Constantinople, which is the city that we're in, is going to be in an earthquake zone. So they have a lot of architectural issues that they deal with that they wouldn't have had to deal with in ancient Rome. The plan is a combination of a basilica and a central plan structure. So what you see is that Greek cross in the middle, right here. And then we have the square basilica form around it. It's actually going to take on a form that is very common in the East, that of a round dome on top of a square structure or a cubic structure. The interior is going to be lavishly decorated with mosaics. And hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. The dome itself is ashlar masonry. So it is stones that are put together and basically holding together based on weight. It distributes weight through a series of semi-domes, so the weight has to get to the ground. From the top of the dome, that weight transfers down into these half domes or semi-domes, down into the walls and piers that we see surrounding the Hagia Sophia. It also makes use of pendentives, which are weight-bearing or theoretically weight-bearing, and basically it opens up the areas around the dome. So instead of building a wall around this, we're using what is effectively a groin vault with a dome at its center, allowing for a lot of open space. That dome is going to be important. Think about where we use domes today. Typically, we use them in sports stadiums or any structure where we want a lot of people to have a good view of what's going on or good acoustics. This is the same reason they're doing it here, because religion is going to be the place where we see the most people gathering at one time. So it makes sense that they're using the same technology that we use today for large groups. The dome interior is supposed to reflect the idea of the heavens. So it is gold, giving us the idea of divinity, of something that is otherworldly. It symbolizes something. It is the heavens. Light takes on a mystic quality. We have all of these windows. So we have a lot of light in this structure, very different from what we would see in your average home, which might have a window and a door, if that. Most homes are going to be dark. They're going to have low, maybe 7-foot, 6-foot ceilings at the time. People are shorter, so you can get away with it. And walking into something like this is going to be miraculous. You don't have to believe in God when you walk into the Hagia Sophia. You know he exists because, well, this building exists. And this much light, this kind of size, the height of the dome, all would seem miraculous to your average person on the street at the time. The same reason the cathedrals will be so important later in European history. The whole thing is supposed to represent basically a microcosm of the universe. The dome, gold, representing the heavens. The stone representing the earth. So what we're seeing is the terrestrial and the celestial brought together. The golden heavens above, the earthly space below. Later, the Hagia Sophia will become a mosque in 1453 after the Ottoman Empire will conquer Constantinople. And many of the mosaics and murals are going to be plastered over because Islam is aniconic, so we don't want the images to be there. However, because they are frescoes, because they are mosaics, many of them still survive under plaster today, some of them having been opened up. Why? Because in 1955, this becomes a museum. Because in 1955, the Hagia Sophia becomes a museum. Due to an earthquake that happened, caused a lot of damage. The Turkish government at the time is highly secular, and they decided, you know what, if you want government help, that's fine, but what we're going to do is we're going to make it open to everyone so we don't have fights about it. That being said, since June of 2020, it has been reconsecrated as a mosque, so currently it is officially a mosque, although it still functions as a museum. Somewhat confusing, but this is a very interesting spot, Constantinople. It's in the center of, or it's a part of the Muslim world today, but also part of the Christian European world today. So since it's at this crossroads, we get these interesting ideas about whether it should be a church, a mosque, a museum. The Turkish government in the past had taken the perspective that, hey, you know what? Let's not have people fight over it. We'll just call it a museum. The current government has taken a different approach. So, something to keep in mind when you're talking about the Hagia Sophia.